When's the last time you owned a Sony Xperia phone or even saw one out in the wild? It probably isn't that regular an occurrence for you. But with the latest Xperia 1 Mark VI, I think Sony has delivered one of its most compelling smartphones in its history. So how does it compare to what many think of as the de facto Android flagship, the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra? I'm Cam Bunton, this is Trusted Reviews, and in this video, I'll tell you. So let's talk the first thing you notice when you very first take these out of their boxes. The way they look and feel. Look at them from arm's length and there's almost a similarity in style, at least when looking at the three cameras stacked in a line on the back, and these light grey titanium coloured backs too. But that's about where the similarity ends, because the experience of holding them feels very different, and if I had to pick one purely based on in-hand experience, it's no real contest. The Sony gets it. Firstly, the phone is narrower and so doesn't stretch the grip anywhere near as much, but it also has raised dimples all over the rear surface of the phone and grooves around the edges, making it a much grippier phone that's less likely to slip and slide off stuff or out of your hand. The Samsung, on the other hand, with its wider build and right-angled corners, can be quite uncomfortable with the wrong grip, especially when you add the fatigue that comes with having a phone that weighs 40 grams more than the Sony. Sony has other practicalities too, like a 3.5mm headphone port for wired audio and a microSD card slot for expanding storage. But while Sony takes the win for comfort and practicality, Samsung gets it for durability. The glass on the front is more impact and scratch resistant, and the titanium frame adds a rigidity and strength that's missing from the Sony. As a little side note, if you try and twist the metal frame, the Sony makes a little bit of a creaking sound, making it feel a tad weaker. They're both water and dust resistant to the same level though, offering protection against being submerged in shallow water, and Sony's even gone to the trouble of getting a double certification, so it's fine for splashes too. Now, turning to talk displays for a bit, I think this is one area that actually is a bit of a difference maker. And it's got nothing to do with the brightness, the colours, the refresh rates or the sharpness. And if you've watched any S24 Ultra content this year, you'll already know what it is that makes the difference. It's the anti-reflective glass on the front. As well as being more durable, that Gorilla Glass armor on the front of the Samsung is very good at reducing brightness and glare of any reflections from around you. The result is that the display in any condition is far easier to read, it's easier to watch movies on and easier to game on. So when you're moving from light to dark environments or the other way around, it's the type of feature that makes a real difference. As does the fact that generally when it does need to adjust brightness automatically, it does it quicker and more smoothly than the Sony. But crucially again, because it has that anti-reflective quality, it doesn't need to be anywhere near as bright to be visible. Specs are good too, it's technically a brighter panel than the Sony and it's sharper with more than 500 pixels per inch when its full resolution is enabled. Sony's Full HD Plus resolution is still pretty sharp though, but some 100 pixels per inch off what Samsung offers. Samsung's display is also considerably larger, so I find it a lot more immersive for gaming, watching movies or multitasking. Plus, due to the size of the Sony phone and the skinny bezels, I found that I struggled with accidental touches on the Sony phone more frequently. But let's move on. And when it comes to speed, fluidity, responsiveness, there's not much to separate these two phones. They're both really fast, powerful devices that can handle even the most graphically intense tasks. There's so little to separate them. Now, if you go into longer sessions, the Sony having the dimmer, lower resolution display actually helps its case because it's less demanding on the processor to keep those titles running. But there's really not enough in this to call one out over the other phone. But there is one area of performance that the Sony really outshines a lot of the competition, and that's in battery life. I've been able to get a huge amount more screen time and real everyday usage from a full charge from Sony's phone than pretty much any other phone that I've tested this year, even ones using the same Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 processor. I'm a pretty light user though, and both of these phones can generally, for me, get to the end of a second day without too much trouble. This is with about 2 or 3 hours of casual screen time mixed between gaming, social media, camera usage and web browsing, but the Samsung will generally need plugging in at the end of the second day to get through the third, where Sony's didn't. On my lightest days, I managed to get to the morning of a fourth day before plugging it in. But even when I measured battery consumption watching Netflix or gaming on both, the Sony was more conservative with its battery usage. If, for instance, I watched an hour of Netflix and did 30 minutes of Mario Karts, the Sony would only drop 10% battery total. The Samsung would be closer to 13 or 14%. and that adds up over a couple of days. Even heavier users among you though shouldn't have any real trouble getting a full day from both phones, perhaps even 2 days depending on how demanding your usage is. If you're playing Genshin Impact or Call of Duty on their highest setting for hours, you might just be able to drain it in a day. And while Samsung's phone can charge at 45 watt speeds and Sony's can charge at 30 watt speeds, there wasn't a significant difference in charging speeds either. Both take over an hour to fully refill from empty and are within about 3 or 4 minutes of each other to reach 50%. But let's move on to cameras. And which of these is best for you really depends on how you use your camera and how involved you want to be in the process of taking those photos. Both are strong systems, both have weaknesses, but both have a camera system that combines primary, ultra-wide and zoom cameras, but with quite different approaches. Regardless of which of them that you use, there are consistent differences between the Sony and the Samsung for the most part. Sony's processing by default takes on a more muted, less processed approach to colors, contrast and sharpening. So Samsung's photos, generally speaking, are a little more saturated with more vivid colors, and when you start zooming, the Sony image quality does seem to get a little bit worse, often softening detail and struggling to retain colors and texture in the lighter parts of the image, where Samsung seems to do better at processing those parts of landscapes in particular. Now in general, I did find those standard zoom pictures to have a bit of a glazed look on the Sony, with highlights and lighter parts of those images looking a bit washed out, whether it was sun-bleached grass in a field or someone's face. However, once you push past the optical zoom range, Samsung tends to do this thing where it effectively uses processing to make up colors and details, to the point where they look really artificial. More like a painting than natural textures and detail, where Sony's doesn't do that. Sony still has a more natural and realistic texture, even if it isn't particularly sharp. And where Sony really wins with photography is when you want to shoot small things that are really close up. To some extent you can shoot those if you stand back and use a zoom on a Samsung, but when you use the Sony's telephoto macro mode, you can get within a few centimeters, and as long as you're happy to work for it, holding the phone really steady and manually adjusting the focus until it's in the right place, you can get some incredible detailed shots of flower pollen, little insects or small toys, whatever takes your fancy. But also in regular photo mode, Sony's 2x zoom using the main sensor also makes it possible to get close, focused shots with good detail and depth. Now if you don't use the macro mode on the zoom, it's quite difficult to get an in-focus shot of anything that's relatively close. Samsung does a little better here, shooting images in regular camera mode at 5x zoom from about an arm's length away. Sony can't really do that without switching to the telephoto macro mode. Now at nighttime you get an automatic night mode on both phones, but again Samsung takes on that more hyper-real, oversaturated, contrasty look. Despite that, it was more consistent in terms of keeping images sharp in focus and blur-free than the Sony was. The Xperia again would struggle a bit with more grain and noise, and sometimes struggle with evening out the motion from shaking hands. So as much as I prefer the colors, Samsung tends to do much better with keeping those images sharp and clean, and does it really easily. So that AI processing can be good for some things. Just like with the photos, I also found Samsung's did a lot more processing with the video capture, adding saturation and HDR effects to video so that even overcast skies looked a bit too blue. But at the same time, the bright sky was dimmed so you could still see the detail in the clouds without losing detail in the foreground objects. Sony takes on a more muted tone but without that heavy HDR effect, so skies would sometimes blow out. Now I'm a little bit torn between these phones, but for me personally, I'm happy putting up with the odd quirks of the Sony phone to get that telephoto macro functionality and the option of wide headphones and the longer battery life in a device that's nicer to hold and more comfortable to use. However, I think for most people wanting to buy the best phone, the Samsung will be a better choice. It does more of the things that are important and it does them better. For instance, you get longer software support, a more durable build, and a camera that's easier to use in nearly every condition and rely on getting in focus and sharp results. Plus that display is much better thanks to the anti-glare. There's also the fact that I think, because of the build, I'd be more secure knowing that the S24 Ultra will stand the test of time thanks to a sturdier frame and the more impact and scratch resistant glass on the front. So on balance, I think for most people the Samsung is the better choice. But if you're like me and want something different to the mainstream, even if it means putting up with a few quirks, the Sony's great too. Let me know what you think of these two phones in the comments down below, or you can get me on social media. I'm at Cam Bunton. If you did like this video, please do leave a thumbs up, subscribe and tap that notification bell, and I'll see you again in the next one. Thanks so much for watching. Bye bye.